Welcome to all of our students this evening. I wish I could see you all and thank you in person, but I'll trust that you're there, and glad to welcome both patrons of Southern California chapter and of Northern California chapter who are all participating tonight as we look at part 2 of the introduction to the classical molding. So Sonia, I'm going to share my screen here. And then I will start my PowerPoint. And we should see the introductory slide. Is that correct?
It looks good.
Great, great. Okay. Then just a little bit of extra housekeeping here. And I will begin. Great. So as I said, welcome to part 2 of the classical moldings, the introduction to the classical moldings. For those of you that attended last week, we did a lot of drawing and we drew all the molding shapes. This week, we won't be doing any drawing. This is a lecture, but we'll be talking quite a bit about the philosophy of moldings and how to use moldings in your work. So as I said, last week we learned the basic molding profiles and we drew them together. There's really no better way to become familiar with the elements of architecture than to draw them yourself in your sketchbook. You're now familiar with the zoology of the moldings, if you will, their geometry and a bit about their character. Tonight, we'll talk about strategies for using those parts to create evocative architecture. We'll cover decorative embellishment of the moldings. We'll look how moldings are used to communicate an allegory of structure. And we'll explore concepts that can help guide us when we're designing with moldings. To start tonight, I'd like to circle back to an idea that we discussed at the beginning of the lecture. We came to understand the moldings as the atomic units of classical architecture. I asked you to think about moldings in that sense, not as decorative trim to be added to otherwise plain architecture, but as the basic building blocks of the architecture. In the same way that we build matter, substances, chemical compounds, by combining the atoms of elements together in various ways, so then is classical architecture built up by combining moldings together in different configurations. On the screen right now, you see a drawing of a Tuscan column and entablature by William Chambers from his treatise. And you can see here how the various moldings that are in play are actually used to build up the character and the nature of the architecture. For example, at the top of the column here, we see this beautiful ovalo molding, and we learned about the ovalo last week. But it's circular in plan, and it creates a beautiful kind of bell-shaped echinus, which is what we call it. And we learned that echinus means sea urchin, that beautiful bell shape. Similarly, below that, we see the astragal of the column, which is this binding molding that goes around it, and it's a bead molding that separates the necking from the column shaft. And below that, a fillet and a conge molding. And then below that, we see the base moldings of the Tuscan column. And we have this beautiful big torus molding above this fascia of the plinth at the bottom. And here's a Tuscan column capital in the wild, if you will. This is a column we designed for a house in Carmel. And you can see those shapes in full sunlight. And I think you can see how the beautiful modeling of the shade and the shadow upon the surfaces of the molding really sort of sets them off and brings out the character of these moldings. And here's a Tuscan cornice that shows how the actual shape of that cornice is built up out of a series of moldings. So we see At the bottom here, we see this cavetto, cove mold at the bottom, an intervening fillet, and then an ovalo molding above that is a bed mold. And then this overhanging corona, which is a fascia topped with a conge molding that mediates into a fillet here. And then at the top, this crowning molding is a cyma recta molding. And the top of it, we have a final fillet to give it some prominence and crispness at the top. So in this way, individual moldings are clustered together in series to create the elements of classical architecture. There we go. Here's a drawing from my sketchbook, a series of drawings showing that exact thing. These are sections of column bases. In the center, we have a Tuscan column base right here, which is a simple plinth, which is that fascia at the bottom, that big, beautiful torus here, a small fillet, and then a conge molding blending up into the shaft of the column. And for something a little more complex, this is the Attic base, which is the classic base of the Ionic order, but you'll see it with lots of different columns, a very common configuration. And again, the plinth is a fascia, and then a torus, a fillet, and then that deep, beautiful, shadowy scotia, another fillet to set it off, and then I call it a bead here, but it's really another torus, and then a fillet, and then that conge molding that blends up into the column shaft. So again, these are two examples of how individual shapes of moldings are clustered together in a series to create architecture. And here's that same design, that Attic base, in this photograph from the pilaster at the Breakers in the mansion in Newport, Rhode Island by Richard Morris Hunt. So we'll start part 2 of this class with a look at embellishment of the moldings. Moldings are often used to embellish, or are often embellished in many different ways to add additional layer of interest and individual character. In part 1, I spoke about how the language of classical architecture operates on many different levels, many scales simultaneously, from the very large to the very small. This is one of the great virtues of the language, one of the reasons that it speaks to us in such a fluent way. The embellishment of moldings is another piece of that puzzle. The moldings are the smallest physical elements of the language, the atoms of classical architecture, and they provide important legible character at the scale of the very small. And by embellishing these tiny elements, we can add yet another level of detail, another scale to delight the eye of the viewer. It's a kind of subatomic structure, in a sense. So here we see a chart. This is from Robert Adams' treatise, Classical Architecture. And this shows a variety of embellishment of the basic shapes. So we see the shapes in section on the left in very much the same way that you drew them last week. And on the right, we see possibilities for embellishment. The canonical embellishments, the classic embellishments include the egg and dart embellishment of the ovalo, and you can see that in the middle here. Here we see the ovalo on the left, and here we see the egg and dart embellishment. And we often see this on the echinus of a column, like the Ionic column, for example. And also the tongue and dart and the leaf and dart with acanthus and other vegetal motif on the cyma reversa. So if we see the cyma reversa up here in section, and we can see the tongue and dart and the leaf and dart embellishments. And we'll talk a bit about those. As I said, the ovolo is often decorated with an egg and dart motif. Here we see it. The egg and dart is the ubiquitous classic embellishment of the ovolo. When you see egg and dart, it's an ovolo molding. Even if it's deeply sculpted, like this example is. I mean, it's almost dematerialized into three-dimensional sculpture of these beautiful egg shapes resting in these beautiful kind of womb-like baskets, and then the intervening darts here. But if you look at, as I said last week, I believe, if you look at the profile of that dart, that's the shape of the ovolo. That's that quarter round, and everything else is kind of sculpted down into the sculptural egg and dart. The egg and dart dates from the early Greek period, and there are many different stories about the origin of the egg and dart, life and death, the egg and the spear, male and female, the egg, the womb, and the dart, the male dart. Just another view of egg and dart molding in cast plaster. It's one of the samples in our office that I took a photo of. And here you can see the beautiful sculptural character of this molding when it's done well. And here the intervening darts are rendered as actual arrows or darts, so that nature is kind of made more explicit. But you see it in lots of different varieties and lots of different characters. Here's a good example of a really different one. This is a detail of the Doric column capitals and entablature at the Circus in Bath, England. The architect here was John Wood the Elder, and this was carved about 1760 in limestone. Note the egg and dart and the echinus of the column capitals here, right here. And notice the wide spacing of the darts and the nearly circular eggs in that sort of broad enveloping basket there. So very unusual, very different than the other examples we saw. And this gives you an idea of how the nature of these embellishments can be fine-tuned to a particular building in a particular place. And the architect or the designer has wide discretion to develop these kind of embellishments in ways that are idiosyncratic or interesting or particular to a particular building. This is an example of the tongue and dart embellishment of the cyma reversa. So this again is in cast plaster. And you can see that cyma reversa shape. And remember, the cyma reversa is convex at the top and concave at the bottom. And if you look at this molding, and even though it's embellished into these beautiful organic forms, it still retains that cyma reversa shape of convex at the top and concave at the bottom. The tongue and dart, you can see here, usually consists of these beautiful tongue-like shapes that are kind of draping over the molding, and the intervening darts, like we saw with egg and dart. This example has these kind of organic shaped lobes here, which are very sensual and interesting in their shape, very organic. The shape of the tongue and dart is really appropriate for the cyma reversa because that shape of the tongue kind of draping over follows the profile of the molding really beautifully. This is one of the common ways that the cyma reversa is embellished. And here's some more examples. Another plate from Robert Adams' treatise. Egg and dart, leaf and dart, tongue and dart. Leaf and dart is a variation of the tongue and dart. It's similar, but it takes on a vegetal form instead of the tongue form. So we can see that over here. Here's leaf and dart, but again, it's one of the shapes that we see most commonly with the cyma reversa. Here on the right, we can see those moldings mitered back into the wall. So on the left edge, you see the profile, and that's the cyma reversa shape right there. If we look up here on the tongue and dart, you can see that same shape, convex at the top, concave at the bottom. And another example at the bottom of a more sparse rendition of the leaf and dart. But there's that beautiful shape, that cyma reversa shape. Similarly, up at the top, we see the egg and dart on the ovalo. And again, if you look at it in profile, you see this beautiful ovalo shape here, that quarter round. Sometimes it's more purely a quarter round circle. It can also be somewhat flattened, maybe for interior wall treatment or something where a slightly less dramatic geometry is required, and it can take on an elliptical shape. Another thing you'll notice is this leaf on the corner. When these moldings wrap around the corner, it's very hard to miter a ovalo and have it look right. The egg and dart is very difficult to kind of miter around a corner. So very often you'll see an acanthus leaf or some kind of vegetal leaf, like a fig leaf, essentially placed over the corner to kind of conceal that corner. And that's what you're seeing there. So here's an example. This is a colonial door surround for a project that we designed here in Los Angeles. And you can see the pilaster here, this Doric pilaster flanking the door. And you can see the echinus of the column is rendered in egg and dart, here carved in wood and painted. And then you can see that acanthus leaf at the corner, concealing the intersection. These are beads, bead moldings, which we discussed last week. It's a small half-round molding, usually a dividing or a separating molding, different from the torus, which is a major molding. But these are example of beads, and as you can see, very often they're rendered literally as sculptural beads, literally like beads on a string. So you'll often see alternating lozenge shape beads with these smaller sort of disc-shaped beads on their sides, and those are called reel. So this is called a bead and reel embellishment. These are the reels and these are the beads. And they can take on a variety of different characters, whatever the designer can dream up, can be used here. So the designer has, as I said, wide discretion in developing the nature of these embellishments. But when you see bead and reel embellishment like this, you often think of the bead molding. Another way bead moldings are embellished is by a rope, like a twisted rope, as you see here. So it emulates a rope or a twisted cord. And then other variations on that same theme. Sometimes it's plant forms like fronds or palm fronds that are twisted into rope. And you see those here, for example, or here. It could also take on a cluster of buds, like flower buds. So this is kind of synthesis of the organic and the bead and reel embellishment. So lots of wonderful options with these kind of moldings. And here's an entablature. This is the entablature designed by Palladio of the Ionic order at the Basilica in Vicenza. And here you can see the entire entablature, and you can see a variety of moldings embellished here in sort of canonical classical ways. So up here starting at the bottom, the architrave here at the bottom consists of three regions, three fasciae, and then it's separated by two beads, and they're each embellished in a different way that they're both kind of twisted forms that seem to feel like plant forms twisted into rope-like elements. Next at the top there, we have a cyma reversa, and that's embellished in the leaf and dart embellishment that we see there, and you can see it in profile here. Then the frieze, this is called a pulvinated frieze, which is a frieze that bulges out like that, almost like it's under the weight of the cornice above. And that's unadorned here, but then this bed molding at the top here is a cyma reversa, and again, we see the leaf and dart embellishment. And then above that, we have another bed mold here before the cornice, and this is an ovalo. You can see it in profile. And we see the egg and dart molding embellishment here. And then finally at the top here, we have another cyma reversa, and here we see tongue and dart. Okay, so they're changing it up a little bit for that top molding up there. Okay. And then here's a photo of the building itself that we were just looking at, and showing the beautiful sculptural character of that entablature up above the columns. This is, again, Palladio. This is an upper story of that building, the Basilica in Vicenza by Andrea Palladio. This is a watercolor rendering of a project I designed for a property here in Los Angeles in Hancock Park. And it features a giant Ionic order on this front facade, rendered in carved limestone that you see here. If we look closer, we can zoom in a bit. This is a pencil drawing we did during design development, showing a close-up of the detail of the column capital and entablature of that house, as a way of kind of showing the nature of the decorative detail to the client. And I think this drawing very nicely shows the kind of engaging detail that can result from embellishment of the moldings. And here we see a variety of embellishments that we've learned about previously. The tongue and dart on the cyma reversa. Again, the tongue and dart here on another cyma reversa. This ovalo up here is egg and dart. And then those same moldings repeated up in the raking cornice of the pediment up here. And here's a close-up of the column capital of that house, showing the egg and dart at the chinas, that beautiful ovalo shape that runs around at the top of the column. And then we also see bead and reel molding over here in the side view in this band. There's a bead and reel. And this shows how those embellishments can become part of the elements of architecture in a way that feels natural. Another thing to note with this design is that it features a sculptural embellishment of the necking of the column here. And I've told this story many times, but our client was a Texan that was moving to Southern California. So he was leaving Texas, moving to Los Angeles. And we wanted to do some decoration on the carvings of the exterior of his house that meant something personal to him. So we created these column capitals for his house that feature the state flower of Texas and California. So we have the California golden poppy here, alternating with the Texas bluebonnet. And that marches its way around the necking of the column. I think it's a nice, another nice demonstration of how we can take these elements and we can make them personal. We can make them particular to a particular location or a particular client. So next we'll talk about structural logic, dramatizing gravity. Gravity is a primary contributor to the presence of stress inside a building or an architectural construction. But gravity does something else. It implies something else about a classical building, the existence of up and down. Organic nature acknowledges gravity's effect in this way by structuring most living things differently at the bottom and the middle and the top. So trees, for example, are a perfect demonstration of this. Trees have roots that anchored them deep into the ground, and then they have a soaring trunk in the middle. And then at the top, they have branching branches. So they're very different response by nature, depending on where it occurs within the living thing. Human beings, ourselves, very much the same way. We have feet on the ground and legs, and we have a trunk-like body, and then we have the head at the top. Similarly, the elements of classical architecture are organized and differentiated into a clearly articulated base and middle and crown. Classical architecture thus unites abstract mathematical geometry and organic nature. As we've seen, we can look at the moldings through the lens of geometry. That's what we did together last week. And this gives us a useful way to put them into categories. And we could see that in the top row here, where the molding is precisely defined by a geometric construction of some type. But we can also look at moldings as categorized by function, which guides us to understand them as tools the designer uses to show the observer what the building is experiencing at any given point. If you take nothing else away from this lecture tonight, I hope you will remember this idea. Moldings can be understood as tools the designer uses to show the observer what the building is experiencing at any given point. And we get a little glimpse of that here at the bottom view here in this slide, where imagine it's a human being stepping down on top of a block of gel-like substance or clay. And as the weight comes down and that gel-like substance experiences the weight of the person pressing down on it, it distends and squishes out in a way that creates a shape that kind of speaks to us and says that it's bearing weight. So you can think of moldings that way. So you can imagine sensors distributed across the surfaces of architecture communicating to us. Those sensors are moldings. So here's a cartoon I drew many years ago to kind of display that. And here we see a section of the base moldings at the bottom and the cornice moldings at the top of a classical building. And if we start at the top, we see the cyma recta, and it speaks to us. It says, I'm a cyma recta, I'm at the top. I reach out delicately into the air. And in the middle, we see a cyma reversa bed molding, and it says, I'm a cyma reversa. I'm supporting the cornice above me. I bulge out slightly at the top because that cornice is heavy. And then down at the bottom, we see the base moldings of the building, and they speak to us as well. I'm a big fat torus. I feel the weight of the whole order above me. Oh, so heavy, I bulge out because of the strain. So if we think of it in this light, classical buildings can be seen as vibrant tableaus, as a kind of matrix filled with nodes and intersections that are buzzing with information about the physics of structure that the building is experiencing. You'll notice the moldings at the top, at the cornices, tend to reach out into the sky. They're shaped in a way that makes them feel light and delicate and outwardly reaching. And you'll notice the moldings at the bottom tend to bulge out almost as if they're supporting the weight of all of that construction above them. This is the way that moldings support the allegory of structure. that is conveyed by the classical language of architecture. So in this plate, we see the moldings organized not by geometry, not the way we looked at them last week, but by function. So at the top, we have crowning moldings. These are moldings that are appropriate at the top of a building or at a top of an architectural construction or a cabinet. Those include the Cyma recta, the cavetto, and the conge. And then we have supporting moldings. Supporting moldings are appropriate lower down where they support elements above. The ovalo, the Cyma reversa, and the thumb molding or the Greek echinus. And then we have binding moldings. These are moldings which appear to tie or bind elements together, like the torus or the bead. And we have separating moldings. These are moldings which appear to separate regions of the architecture and delineate forms, like the fillet, the bead, and the scotia. And then at the bottom, we have prone moldings. These are moldings that are in an upside down orientation, and they're used at the base. And some of the other moldings that we've looked at in crowning conditions can be used at the base in a prone orientation, like the cavetto, the Cyma recta and the Cyma reversa, and also the ovalo and the conge. You can see those here at the bottom of the plate. So another way to help the designer visualize how to dramatize gravity with moldings is to look at the final curve at the top of the molding. If that final curve of the molding is upward, as if it's pushing up vertically to hold the construction above, such as in the ovalo or the Cyma reversa, then that molding should be considered a supporting molding and is appropriate to be used lower down, below other elements. On the other hand, if the last curve of the molding is outward, as if it were reaching out into the air, as with the cavetto or the Cyma recta, then that molding is most appropriate as a crowning element to be used at the top. So that's a really excellent rule of thumb to help you choose the correct molding for the correct place in a building, is think about the last move at the top that the molding does. Is it outward or is it upward? Next, I'd like to share with you a few important principles to consider when designing with moldings. And the first of these guiding principles is the concept of type and specimen. It's a very important concept in the philosophy of classical architecture. When we learn the elements of classical architecture, we're often taught to understand them as components that are precisely defined by rigorous specifications and precise proportions. That's exactly what we learned in part 1 of this class. The moldings as understood through their geometry. But to be truly creative in the use of classical moldings, we should feel free to vary from the canon when appropriate. Almost no finished work is exactly the way we see it in the canon. Almost no finished work that we see in the field is exactly like that, nor should we want them to be. Moldings, like all of the elements of classical architecture, are best thought of as archetypes. Very important word. An archetype is an original idealized model from which all things of the same type are considered representations based on shared characteristics. A good example can be drawn from the natural world, from taxonomy. Dogs, for example, share a common list of characteristics, a similar body plan, 4 legs, an elongated torso, head at one end, tail at the other, similar skeletal structure, etc. Yet we see a wide array of different breeds, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. But they're all derivative of the archetypal model. They're all dogs. The same is true with the elements of classical architecture, and more specifically for our talk tonight with the classical moldings. Although we learn the moldings as a series of archetypal shapes, in the field, those shapes are manifested by a nearly endless variety of possibilities. Curvature can be circular, can be elliptical, it can be compound. Moldings can be understated or they can be oversized. They can be smooth and plain, or they can be exuberantly embellished. They can be used in different combinations to achieve varying effects. The next concept is alternation and contrast. Moldings are almost never used individually. They're usually combined together in a series. When deciding which moldings to comprise a series, try to establish contrast between them. This contrast can be between straight and curved moldings, such as in this example of a Doric entablature for a colonial door surround, featuring alternating straight and curved molding elements. For example, we can see here that we have the necking of the column, for example, which is a straight fascia molding. And then we go to a convex ovalo, then another straight molding with a curved molding at the top. Same thing up here, straight and curved, straight and curved. So that alternation provides variety, which is really, really important to making these elements speak to us in a thoughtful way. Contrast may also be established between concave and convex shapes. The attic base of the Ionic column, which we saw previously, is a well-known example. Here you can see an example of that, where two exuberant convex tori are separated by a deeply concave scotia. Here's the torus at the bottom, major torus, and then this deep scotia, and then a minor torus above that. So alternating of convex and concave shapes. This is an example by Palladio from a church of his in Venice. Repetition. Repeating shapes of a certain type can sometimes be effective, but we should avoid stacking identical moldings in literal repetition. This leads to monotony. So on the right-hand side, you see two Sima reversa moldings separated by fillets, but they're identical and they're stacked one on top of another. That's something you should avoid. On the left, much better. We have this beautiful big ovalo, elliptical ovalo or thumb molding here. Large and dominant, and then below it we have a completely different kind of molding, a small bead molding and a fillet and conge molding. No repetition here. The instance on the right, though, is something that we should try to avoid. It leads to kind of a monotonous character to the architecture. Coordination. The elements of classical architecture relate to each other in a rigorous manner, usually by establishing definable, repeatable geometric alignments. Moldings, which are the smallest components of the architecture, should do the same thing. When designing assemblages of moldings, position them so they relate to each other in a rational manner. This kind of geometric clarity imparts a crispness and legibility, which is easily discernible by the observer. For a straightforward example, consider the base moldings of the Doric column. The major torus is set over a plinth so that the curve of the torus is tangent to the extension of the vertical face of the plinth. We see that right here. Above the major torus is a smaller minor torus, which itself is tangent to a line extended upward from the geometric center of the major torus. So this line extends up and becomes the tangent line that allows us to place this, and so on. The language of classical architecture is replete with these kind of alignments. And it doesn't mean you have to follow them in every instance, but the notion of these kind of geometric alignments is really, really important because it imparts a legibility to the architecture that people can really pick up. Facial angle. Here we see 3 examples of the crowning moldings for a building or for a cabinet or some other construction. An important way that moldings coordinate with each other is by observing a facial angle. The facial angle is the angle at which the molding groups extend from the prevailing surface, usually at the crowning condition at the top. The canonical orders all use variations of a 45-degree geometry, and this is generally a really good place to start. But shallower and steeper facial angles are common. For example, for a cornice on a building in especially sunny or rainy locations, where enhanced protection for windows below is desirable, a shallower facial angle might be warranted, like the one you see on the left, so that the overhang extends out further. Conversely, for interior wall treatment, where the effect is to be less monumental and more restrained, a steeper facial angle, like the one on the right, might be desirable. But the kind of perfect mean in the middle is the 45-degree angle, and that's what the canonical versions of the orders all use as a baseline. Proportion and scale. Both proportion and scale must be resolved to have a harmonious whole. Strive to create a hierarchy with your moldings. Always establish certain moldings to be dominant and allowing other moldings to be subservient to them. If all the moldings are the same size, they compete for our interest and create a crowded or agitated visual effect. This is a bit like the discussion we had a few moments ago about repetition. It's similar. We want to create a hierarchy with our moldings, so we establish certain moldings as being the dominant ones, and the other ones support those moldings. So here's a good example. On the right, we have this rather strange example where we have a cavetto crowning molding up here that's just about the same height as this enormous torus below it. And so these two moldings kind of compete with each other for your visual interest. Much better to use a configuration like the one at left, where the cavetto is established as the dominant molding. And this is a decision that the designer made. Said, I'm going to establish the cavetto as the dominant molding, and then the torus below becomes a subservient molding to it. That way, we've established a hierarchy, and we don't have different elements kind of speaking in the same voice. As I said, it's a much better strategy to look to one molding to be larger and more assertive, to dominate the composition, and to use the smaller surrounding moldings to provide contrast and to define the boundaries of the larger shape. So here's a good example. This is an example of interior crown molding, a very common design that many of us may have seen. And here the larger cyma recta is dominant. And it's punctuated by small fillets, top and bottom, which delineate its boundaries. And those fillets are subservient to the cyma recta. But also below it, we have an ovolo bed molding underneath, which supports the larger molding above and is subservient to it. You'll also notice that the ovolo below has its last curve pushing up. So it's appropriate as a supporting molding underneath. And that's why you so often see that ovalo under something dominant above. So here's an example of what can happen when you ignore hierarchy completely and simply start clustering moldings together willy-nilly. I'm hoping that none of you designed this. This is a photo I got off the web, but I think it shows really nicely what happens when you ignore hierarchy and simply start to play with moldings, stacking them one on top of another. You end up with noise. You know, good music has a rhythm and it has a theme, and then it has supporting themes that are subservient to the major theme. But when you ignore that, you don't have music, you have noise. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this example. So here's an example of how proportion is important when considering the size of moldings. This is a corner of an entry portico, and on the right we see the pedestal and the base moldings of the door pilaster, and you could just catch a view of the door on the right-hand side. On the left, we see moldings of the prevailing wall of the building itself. Both elements feature tori, which are the common moldings we often see at the base of buildings. But note how the moldings are sized in proportion to the architectural element to which they belong. So the tori at the entry door pilaster are smaller on the right, in sensible proportion to the size of the portico, size of the door. The torus of the base of the building wall on the left is much, much larger in proportion to the overall height of the entire building. Optical refinements. This is an advanced and very nuanced subject. This is one that can capture an entire career of interest and study. Renaissance masters devised methods to modify the moldings to enhance their effect at various locations in the structure. For example, moldings high on the facade of a building can be modified to read better to an observer at street level. This plate from Sebastiano Serlio, the great Renaissance master, shows a method for making horizontal masonry courses in buildings appear to be the same height from the vantage point of an observer standing a prescribed distance away from the building. As the building rises, the courses of masonry become taller in a calculated fashion. You can see that on the right-hand side. This is an example of an optical refinement. So another example of optical refinements. These are the base moldings at the base of a column. This is the attic base that we've seen many times by now, with the two tori and the intervening scotia. The arrows indicate the anticipated angle of viewing to which the architect is designing. So in the middle, we see the kind of the golden mean. This is the unmodified attic base. Here, we see the torus, circular torus, and this elliptical scotia in between. And this is what you might look like if you were looking at it straight on. This is the way you'd want those moldings to look. But imagine if we were looking at the moldings from above, and we look at the left here. If we were looking up above here and looking down on this, we might miss a good portion of the shadow that's falling on this scotia. So what has the architect done here in his refined version? The architect's taken this upper torus and distended it upward. He's pulled it up and changed the shape of it so it's more in line with our eye view. And that gives us more of a view of the shadow that might develop underneath the torus, but it also gives us a better view into the scotia. And also he's changed the shape of the scotia in a way that is more aligned with how I might look down upon it. So those are optical refinements. Another example on the right, imagine the moldings for a column base high up on a building. So what might the architect do there? Imagine an upper story of the building and we're looking at it from the sidewalk below. Bear with me, a little technical issue. Okay. Anyway, so what might the architect do there? Well, the architect might be sad that we don't get to see any of this shadowy place underneath this torus because the plinth is blocking it. So what does the architect do? The architect has pushed up this torus to expose more of the bottom surface of it. So we can see more of that beautiful transition from sunlight to shadow on the bottom of that molding. And they've also taken this scotia and changed the shape of it as well, because in this example over here, you wouldn't see any of the scotia. But here, what they've done is made it more vertical and face out more so that you can catch some of it as you look up here and see it. Those are the examples of optical refinements. Once you know that this is what the master architects of the past were doing, it's exciting to walk around the streets of great cities and look at the moldings. It's wonderful. You'll start to see these kind of refinements everywhere. So the last section of my talk tonight, I'd like to talk about the importance of field sketching. There's really no better way to understand the nuances of classical moldings than by drawing the details of great buildings from observation in the field. These drawings become excellent reference guides for future work. But just as importantly, the act of observational drawing leads to a careful study of the relationships, the hierarchies, and the proportions of great buildings. This is a building that I've spent a considerable amount of time observing and drawing, and one that many of you may be familiar with. This is the New York Public Library in Midtown Manhattan on Fifth Avenue, designed by the great architectural firm Carrera and Hastings and completed in 1911. The library is one of the crowning achievements of the American Beaux-Arts movement in architecture. So let's take a closer look at the New York Public Library. For members of the ICAA, this is a favorite building. It's kind of hallowed ground because it's just a block away from ICAA headquarters on 44th Street. And here you can see the monumental Corinthian order of the front facade. Note how the paired columns have a shared plinth base at the bottom. So let me show you that. These pairs of great giant Corinthian columns land down on this shared pedestal and plinth right here. And here's an observational drawing that I made of the base of the plinth of the columns at the New York Public Library. This is a really simple, straightforward drawing. I started by drawing the profile of the moldings on the left, as you can see here. The column coming down with its beautiful fluting. And then I drew the profile of all the base moldings of the column and the plinth here, and then that pedestal base down here. It's a very simple drawing, and then I extended those lines out to the right to kind of indicate the elevation or the look of the moldings as they would face me. And then I wrote the molding names over here on the right. I indicated some of the decorative embellishment of the plinth of the column here, this kind of Greek key embellishment alternating with a acanthus vegetal decoration here. It's quite beautiful. Some of the things I might not have noticed had I not taken the time to draw it, though, are the unusual base moldings here at the bottom of this plinth with this beautiful torus, and then a sunk fillet, and then a raised fillet above it, and then this beautiful prone cavetto molding here, kind of providing a beautiful shadow line underneath this big band above. And that's what you pick up when you take the time to draw things. I might have just walked by this, taken a photograph of it and moved on, and I would never have bothered to look at it closely and to try to understand how it's assembled and understand what might have been in the mind of the architect. But the act of drawing helps you understand that, and that's one of the great values of it. Not only that, then I can save this drawing, and many, many years later, I can look back on it and learn from it and borrow from it, and I can share it with you in a lecture. Another page from my sketchbook. This is the fountain, a section cut through the fountain at the entrance of the New York Public Library. And it's a very simple drawing, very much like we drew last week. We see the various moldings clustered together to make the shape of it. This is actually the outer edge of the fountain. And then the main basin of the fountain has this great big thumb molding, which is quite beautiful. And then down here, we have a prone cyma recta molding in a prone position at the bottom, and then a plinth at the bottom here. Again, but it's a very simple drawing, and it's kind of drawing you want to get used to doing. A simple bold profile to catch the profile, all done freehand, and then shading of the solid portion, the way we did together last week. And then always don't forget to put the name of the building and the name of the element here so you can remember down the road. And another drawing from my sketchbook, similar in nature. In this drawing, I drew the profile again. This is the pedestal at the balustrade that sort of borders the terrace, the great terrace in the front of the New York Public Library. It's a wonderful place. New Yorkers love that terrace. They sit out there and read books, have lunch, and kind of bask in the beauty of the great facade of the library. It's much beloved by New Yorkers. People that live in Midtown will come from blocks around to have lunch on the terrace there. And this is one of the pedestals of the balustrade, the beautiful classical balustrade at the front. And again, this is something that you would walk by every day if you lived there and had lunch there. And you wouldn't take the time to notice it. You might allow the beauty of it to kind of inform your day, but you wouldn't look closely at it. But the act of doing this drawing, which probably took me half an hour, something like that. That half an hour was really well spent because I spent that half an hour understanding how those moldings go together. How were they clustered together? Which moldings are dominant? Which moldings are subservient? How did they work together? Was there anything clever that the designer was doing? And it's really that time spent that's just as valuable as the drawing you end up with at the end of that half hour. So this is the interior of the lobby of the New York Public Library. It's really one of the great interior public spaces in the city. Really magnificent. This heroic Doric order of the walls of the library and these wonderful flanking grand staircases that lead up to the great mezzanine, which leads to the wonderful reading room beyond. And we'll look at it closely together here for a moment. Another photo of the interior of the lobby of the library. And here we can get a little better feel for how those monumental stairs kind of come up through that colonnade and then turn and ascend to the mezzanine. We also start to see the moldings here as we get a little closer. We see for example, an ovalo in that arched architrave that runs around here, and we see an egg and dart molding right there. And we start to see the beautiful embellishment of the other moldings as the wall treatment transitions through a crowning molding into the beautiful vaulted ceiling of the lobby. On another view of that great classical order of the piers on the side of the library here. And a view of the front wall. The order here is the Doric order, and you can see this wonderful, beautiful, tall Doric column that supports this entablature up here. And you can see the echinus, which is that ovalo molding that makes the top of the Doric column. And it's rendered in the egg and dart motif here, which we learned about together. And another view of the opposite wall, the same order. Really magnificent architecture. And as we'll find out, it's very clever architecture as well. So this is a drawing from my sketchbook of the interior order, the Doric order of the New York Public Library, the interior lobby order. I've eliminated in my drawing most of the column shaft here, but we have the base moldings of the column at the bottom. We have the crowning or the capital moldings of the column here, and then we have the entablature up above. And I even noted here base, column, architrave, and cornice. This again is not a terribly complex drawing. Again, I started by drawing a bold profile and did this freehand observationally. And that's the kind of freehand drawing that you should all learn to start to do in your sketchbook. Draw, again, the profile of the moldings as you see them here. I indicated the 45-degree geometry of the crowning moldings at the top. And then I extended the lines of the moldings to the left so that we could get a feel for how they looked in elevation, face on. I did a little bit of shading. I indicated some of the embellishment, the egg and dart embellishment of the ovalo, the leaf and dart embellishment of the cyma reversa here. Very simply rendered, pretty quick drawing. This drawing probably took 45 minutes. But it's very informationally dense, and it's really useful as something to refer to later. But by far and away, the most important thing that I learned during this session where I drew this was the unique qualities of the architecture here. The base moldings are very straightforward. That's the attic base we've seen many times. Also up here, the crowning or the capital moldings of the column, again, not particularly unusual. It's pretty straight Doric. But a couple things I learned up here. First of all, the crowning molding at the top here, where we would normally see a cyma recta molding most often. This architect used a scotia in an upside down orientation. Very unusual and very interesting, very evocative. It's quite beautiful, that shape at the top of the cornice of this order. And then it's topped with I wrote a fascia here, but it's really a fillet. Same thing down here at the bottom. But that's a very unusual place to use a scotia molding in a prone orientation at the top. But it works perfectly because when you turn that scotia upside down, that top motion is outward, the way we talked about. So it works beautifully as a crowning molding, and it's very unusual. Another thing that I noticed that was very unusual, and I noted it here, there's no frieze. Usually there would be another band above the architrave and below the cornice. The architects eliminated the frieze for this interior order, most likely to make it less monumental and more delicate for an interior application. And sometimes you do see that, but it's unusual. And that's something that I might not have noticed had I not spent the time to draw it. If I had taken a photograph and moved on to the next thing, I wouldn't have taken the time to consider how these elements go together and how they work together to create, this beautiful architecture. So I think that that's the most important thing for us to take away from this discussion of drawing in your sketchbook and how important it is that it provides dueling benefits. Obviously, the ability to draw something and then save it and remember it later is powerful and important. But maybe even more important is the notion that simply spending the time to draw the elements is valuable because we learn so much. Okay, so next, that concludes the major part of our lecture tonight. So much shorter tonight. I have a plate here. This is a plate from who's this? Serlio, I think, Sebastiano Serlio, showing different crowning moldings. And what I'd love you all to look and follow along with me. Let's go through this plate from the Renaissance and identify the moldings together. So you can look at them and sort of go along with me, and let's talk about them. So we'll start with this crowning molding up here. And we start at the top with a fillet molding to kind of give it a bit of crispness and definition at the top. Then we have a cyma recta molding, concave at the top, convex at the bottom. Then another fillet, and then a fascia molding here, which is what we call the corona of the cornice. Then below that, we have a bed mold. This is an ovalo, punctuated by fillets on either side. And then we have another fascia down below it. Now, this molding at the top may be a conge. It's a little hard to tell because it's so small, but it may be a little cove shape there that transitions down into the fascia, and that's possible. And then below that, at the bottom, we have, as another bed molding, we have a cyma reversa, convex at the top and concave at the bottom. Next in our examples here is example B, very complex cornice, but again, similar. Let's go down and identify these together. So this is, again, a fillet at the top to give it some thickness and presence. Then here, the crowning molding is not the one we would expect, which is the cyma recta, but this is actually a cyma reversa in a crowning position. Very unusual. I wouldn't normally do this for the reasons I've described. I much prefer my crowning moldings to have that outward motion. But this is a Renaissance master, so who am I to judge? But this is one I wouldn't do, but it's interesting, cyma reversa as a crowning molding. Then below that, it looks like we have a little bead molding here as a separating molding, and then a small fillet at the top. Then below that, we have a fascia for the corona. Then under here, we have this great exuberant bed molding. This is an ovalo, quarter round, punctuated by fillets on either side. And then another fascia, smaller here. And then we have a couple of bed moldings here underneath. This is a cyma reversa. convex at the top, concave at the bottom. And then we have another bead molding here. This bead molding is quirked at the top, which means it includes a groove, kind of a sunk fillet there, which gives it a little extra definition. Okay, crowning element C here. Here we're back to our cyma recta as a crowning element with a fillet at the top and a fillet at the bottom. Then we have a small ovalo in a subservient roll underneath as a bed mold. Another fillet, and then a fascia. Then we go underneath the cornice here, and we have ovalo with fillets. We have what looks like a little bead molding here. It's a little hard to tell. Could be an ovalo, but most likely a bead. Another fascia. Another ovalo, looks like, with fillets on either side. And then at the very bottom, we have a cyma reversa. Again, and a perfect spot for it at the bottom, supporting the elements above because it's bulging out on the top, kind of almost like the weight of the cornice is coming down and it's squishing out at the bottom. So then we'll go in the upper right. This is a, looks like a portion of an architrave of an entablature. And at the top here, we have the top molding of that architrave, and that's a cyma reversa. We can just see the profile, convex, sort of dramatically convex at the top and concave at the bottom. But another way we can tell that that's a cyma reversa is that it has a tongue and dart embellishment. And that's emblematic of the cyma reversa. And then below that, the three regions of the architrave are simply three fascia moldings, stacked one on top of another. And next, in the lower right, we have two base assemblages of base moldings. So let's go through those. This one here is a cyma reversa in a prone orientation. So it's upside down, but it's a cyma reversa, prone. The intervening fillet. Then we have I would call this a torus because it's fairly big and it contrasts with the adjoining moldings. Then below that torus, we have a scotia here. That deep concave shadowy scotia. Remember, scotia means darkness, and that's why, because it casts that big, beautiful shadow that has a gradation from dark, really dark to lighter gray, and then it peeks out into the sunlight. Really beautiful, sensual molding. Below that, after this bordering fillet, is a cyma recta in a prone orientation. So the cyma recta upside down, much like the cyma reverso is prone, this cyma recta is prone. And you'll often see that at the base of buildings where it sort of creates a kind of a beautiful frame for what's happening up above. Then below that, we have a big exuberant torus here, which we often see at the very bottom, almost like that gel is squishing out in a really dramatic way. And then above, below that, we have this plinth, which is a fascia. And similarly here, let's go through these together. This is the cyma reversa in a prone orientation. Like we saw up above, slightly different shape to it, but it is a cyma reversa upside down or prone. Then below that, we have the cyma recta in a prone orientation. Then we have a torus. And then we have three fascia here. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So I'm hoping you all did well with that little exercise and could follow along and guess them yourselves. I am going to stop my share now. And I will be happy to take any questions that any of you may have. Great.
If
So
you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we can take them from there.
great. We do have a question already. That's great. Hi, Eric. Thanks for the great lecture as always. You're very welcome. Glad to be here with you tonight. This may seem a bit of a rudimentary question, but what is your preferred drawing instrument? Mechanical pencil, lead holder, felt pen, etc., and paper size for field sketching. So I like to sketch both with pencil and pen. The drawings you saw in the lecture tonight were predominantly pencil, and I'm really very straightforward with that. Nothing fancy. Number 2 pencil with a rubber eraser is just fine. Number 2 or softer. If you like technical pencils, like architect's pencils, like an F pencil is a perfect sketching pencil. It's softer than the H pencil that is kind of the average. But a number two pencil is fine. I like those. I also like the Eagle drafting pencils, which are soft and nice. Those are great. Bring a sharpener. As far as preferred format, I like big format. So my sketchbooks are, what are they? What's that common size? Winston,
11 by 14, probably.
11 by 14. Yeah, those are all of my sketchbooks are 11 by 14. I keep a journal that I draw in a lot too. But that's for, sort of day-to-day journaling, but I tend to draw in it a lot. And I often use fountain pens in my journal. So I like to sketch in pen, a fine nib on a fountain pen, for example, really, really great for sketching. Okay. Any other questions that anyone might have? Going once, going twice. Okay.
Thank you, Eric. As usual, really great. And this is, I've heard it many times, and I'm always picking up things that I haven't heard before. And also, it's interesting how you can be talking about the same molding, but you keep using different ways of describing it that are very, very handy to hear.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about this language of architecture is there's just so many ways to see it and to find value in it, and different, as you spend time with classical architecture and you learn more about it, you learn different ways to see it, different lenses to kind of view it through, and different ways to appreciate it. I think that's one of the things that makes this language so gratifying to design within, and so I'm always seeing new ways to see these elements. I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to renew over and over again your reasons for wanting the buildings to be like that, right? And fortunately, the language of classical architecture affords lots of ways for us to do that. So it's great. It was my pleasure. This is a lecture that I continue to throw little bits and pieces into. So this is probably a little bit different than the last time you saw it, but and it'll be different next time. But I always love talking about this. Thank you to everybody. Sonia, thank you to you.
Of course. And Eric, we actually have a few questions that came.
Oh, good. Good. Okay, I won't leave quite so. I finished a bit early. This second half of the class is a bit more brief, so it's good. Clearly, Esther sketched at the New York Public Library, says one of our students. I was wondering if you would share the image of the Texan's home. I'm happy to send that out to people if you're interested in it. You can also find it on my website, by the way. If you go to Evans Arc, EVENSARC .com and find it's called A House for a Numismatist, which is a crazy title. He's a world famous coin collector. And so it's one of the things that inspired the house was his affinity for neoclassical architecture and coinage of early America. And so, that's kind of how he found his way to classicism. And but if you look up the House for a Numismatist on my website, you can see all the drawings and plans to it. So let's see. Jose asks, on one of your drawings at the top, you called it a fascia. And at the time you made it, but the great lecture, you called it a fillet. Yeah, that was a kind of a mistake on my part when I was filling in the drawing. The drawings you see here are from many, many, many years ago. And so, in some ways I was still learning about all the words and everything. So as I described last week, a fillet and a fascia are the same shape, but a fascia is a major molding. It's a dominant molding. It's a major element. A fillet is a minor separating molding. So it's really just a matter of hierarchy and usually a matter of size. A fillet you often see separating other moldings. It's put in there to give crispness and definition as moldings transition from one to another, where a fascia stands alone. It's its own molding, and other moldings are subservient to it. So I hope that answers that. Do we have?
I think that's all of them.
Oh, okay, great.
We're caught up now. So
excellent, excellent. Well, blessings to all of you. Great to see both of you, and I wish I could see all of the students, but I really enjoyed this. Hoping you'll continue to support ICAA education. And thanks for attending.